Hello and welcome to Principles of Training. Today, obviously, I'm going to talk to you about principles of training, and I'm going to talk to you about the principles that have stood the test of time, that have been around for many years, will be around for many years to come, and should form the cornerstone of your exercise prescription. Okay, the first 5 points, or the first 5 principles of training that we're going to look at are known as the SPORT principle. S for specificity, P for progression, O for overload, R reversibility, T tedium avoidance, S-P-O-R-T, sport. Point number 1, specificity. Now the specificity principle relates more to strength and conditioning and athlete preparation. Because we know with our fitness industry clients that our fitness industry clients will make progress towards their exercise goals, whether it be cardiovascular health and well-being, changing the way that they look in terms of their body appearance. Those goals can be achieved with all different types of exercise modes. However, for sports people and athletes, they want to improve at their specific sport. So to do that, they need to undertake exercise that will improve their sports performance. Now I'll give you an example of the application of the specificity principle. Quite a while ago, a group of world-class 5-kilometre runners who did a time trial in the 5k run and found that their times were world-class, that is, that they would qualify them for any major tournament around the world in track and field. What they decided to do was stop their running training and do a 6-week block of swimming training. Day 1 of swimming training, they did a time trial in the pool to see how good they were at swimming, and they were quite poor. However, after a 6-week period of high volume, high intensity swimming, they found that their swimming ability improved out of sight. That is, the time trial at the end of the 6 weeks was quite a big improvement from the initial one in the water. What they did after those 6 weeks then was go back to their running tracks and their running training. They did another 5k time trial and found that their running performance slowed quite substantially. That is, the swimming performance or their swimming training for 6 weeks had a negative effect on their running performance. So the summary of the specificity principle is, if you want to be good at something, you've got to spend most of your time doing that activity. And it actually goes a little bit further than that too. Let's say you're a 100-metre sprinter. The majority of your training time should be devoted to speed development over that distance or similar distances. In actual fact, if you'd spent time or a lot of time doing 5-kilometre or 10-kilometre runs as a 100-metre sprinter, you'll find that will actually have a negative effect on your sports performance over a 100-metre distance. Okay, the next point is progression. And to highlight progression, I'd like to draw a graph that demonstrates it. Improvement over time. And we're going to use weeks as the reference point. Improvement over time from 0 to 12 weeks. What we find with our novice or beginner level athletes or clients is that they'll improve quite significantly in the first 6 weeks of exercise, particularly if they didn't have much of a training background prior to it, or there's been a long gap between their last exercise experience. First 6 weeks, we'll find that this beginner level client or beginner level athlete will make tremendous progress towards their exercise goals. And that can be shown as follows. However, after that 6-week period, what we find is that this rate of progression actually starts to slow and taper off. It doesn't plateau, it still continually improves, but as you can see, the rate of improvement is not as great as it was in that first 6-week period. And it's probably not surprising to note that it is this period of time, around this 6-week mark, where we find that there's a big dropout rate from exercise participation in gym environments. So from a fitness instructor point of view, you need to advise your clients that yes, you will make tremendous improvements in the first 6 weeks or tremendous progress towards your exercise goals. But after that 6-week period, what will happen is you'll be investing the same time and effort, but you won't be getting as great a rate of return. And you need to instill confidence in your clients that by maintaining exercise participation, their eventual goals will be reached, and they're just going through a natural effect that happens with exercise participation. Progression will slow after approximately a 6-week period. Okay, the next point is overload, and I'm utilising the FIT principle to highlight to you the concept of progressive overload. Basically what overload implies is that you will improve over 4 to 6 week periods, but if you still want to keep improving or you still want your rate of progression to keep constant, you need to change the program in some way to challenge the body in a way that it hasn't been challenged before. Because our body's very smart. They will adapt to the exercise stress that we impose upon it. Initially we'll make progress, but then the body will adapt. So to ensure that we're continually progressing towards our exercise goals, we need to change what we're doing every 4 to 6 weeks. And as mentioned, the FIT principle is a good way to highlight this. What we've got is frequency, intensity, type, and time. And these variables can be applied to all of your clients' exercise programs. Frequency, how often or how many times per week they exercise. Intensity, how hard are those exercise sessions. Type, what is the type of exercise that they do during these sessions. And time, how long do these exercise sessions last for. Now let's say you've got a beginner level client who wants to go to the gym 3 times per week, wants to improve their cardiovascular health and well-being, so they're using the treadmill for 3 20-minute sessions per week. We'll put those variables into the FIT principle. Frequency, 3 times per week. Intensity, we'll have our client working, that is jogging or walking, at around about 8 kilometres per hour. That's the intensity of the session, or how hard the person is working. Type is treadmill. And as mentioned, the person will be exercising for 20 minutes. Now, as we've mentioned before, this person will make some fantastic progress in the first 6 weeks of their program. However, their rate of progression will start to taper off, which is a natural effect. But also, to ensure continual improvement and continual progression, we need to challenge the body in a way that it has not yet been challenged. We need to apply a progressive overload. And we've got 4 variables that we can manipulate to apply that progressive overload. We can change the frequency from 3 times per week to 4 times per week, increasing the amount of times that the person actually exercises in a week. We can change the intensity of each session by going from 8 kilometres per hour to 8.5 kilometres per hour. So increasing the exercise intensity, or how hard and fast that person is walking or jogging. We can go from a treadmill to a bike. Changing the mode of an exercise is a form of progressive overload. And of course, we can increase the amount of time that we actually do the activity. So we can go from 20 minutes to 21 minutes. Now, as I've mentioned, progressive overload needs to be applied every 4 to 6 weeks, but we only need to apply or change one of these variables. We don't need to change all of them. However, over a period of time, it is good to note that there's been changes made to all of those variables. But for initial and every form of progressive overload, one variable needs to be changed only. Now, it's important to note with these forms of progressive overload that, with the exception of the treadmill cycle or the type of exercise, when we change an exercise session, we either change volume, that is how much time the person spends exercising, or we change intensity, how hard that person exercises. Here we have frequency, which is a form of a volume overload by doing more work. Obviously intensity is an intensity overload, and time is a volume overload, spending more time during the exercise session. And it's important to note that there is an inverse relationship between exercise volume and exercise intensity. That is, if one's high, the other one has to be low. And I'll draw you a graph that represents that. volume versus intensity. As this graph represents, if one is quite high, if volume is quite high, intensity is going to be low. And vice versa. If intensity of the exercise session is quite high, volume is going to be quite low. Give you an example. If you were going to compete at the Beijing Olympics, for example, and you were going to compete in the 42-kilometre marathon, you're at the start, gun goes off, you start running, track official comes out and says, sorry, you're in the wrong event, this is actually the 100-metre sprint, and you think to yourself, well, I may as well give it a shot anyway, when's the next time I'm going to go to the Olympics? What's going to happen to your running speed? It's actually going to increase. You start that race at a running speed or a running intensity that you can maintain for 42 kilometres, which is a big volume. Volume has gone from 42 kilometres to 100 metres. Volume's been reduced significantly. So your running intensity has gone from a pace that you can maintain for such a long distance to an all-out sprint over 100 metres. Therefore, because volume has dropped quite significantly, your running intensity is going to increase quite significantly. And vice versa. That is, it's an inverse relationship. If one's high, the other one's low. Okay, next point is reversibility, which basically means if you don't use it, you will lose it. Now, all the great things that we can achieve through exercise participation, such as improving our health and well-being, our cardiovascular fitness, our strength, our body image or the way our body presents, all of those things can be lost if we don't maintain exercise participation and healthy lifestyle pursuits over a course of time. Therefore, as a fitness instructor, it's important that you promote positive attitudes towards lifelong participation in sport, recreation and fitness, and advise clients that have short-term goals that if they want to maintain those goals for life, they need to maintain their healthy lifestyle, which includes exercise participation for life. Now, I'll give you a very good example of the reversibility principle in practice. Many years ago, I was a high school teacher and I taught both physical education and science. One end of the school was the gym or the sports hall where I conducted the PE classes. The other end of the school was the science lab where obviously we held the science classes. When I finished a PE class, the bell would go, students would move on. I would often find myself running from one end of the school to the other, up 3 flights of stairs to get to the science lab. Now that was no problem because over a period of time I developed the fitness to be able to do that. However, when the Christmas holidays came around and there was a 6-week period before I had to do any stair sprinting whatsoever, I found that day one back of classes I could do the run from one end of the school, from the sports hall to the other end of the school, to the science labs okay, because I maintained some running habits during that holidays. But what I found is I could not sprint up those flights of stairs. I got up the first flight but had to stop and catch my breath. Because I didn't do any in the holidays, I didn't do any stair sprinting in that 6-week period, I lost my stair sprinting fitness and had to redevelop that in term 1 of the following year. And the last point here is tedium avoidance. That's basically keeping the program or the exercise interesting to prevent monotony and prevent boredom and maintaining exercise participation for life. Now I'll give you an example, going back to the FIT principle of tedium avoidance, or the principle of tedium avoidance. As we know, the FIT principle is basically volume and intensity variables, frequency, intensity, type and time. Frequency, volume, intensity is obviously intensity. T down the bottom for time is volume, but T here for type is what you actually do. What you actually do in the exercise session. Now this needs to be changed regularly, not only as a form of progressive overload to keep training and interesting and exciting and maintain these long-term participations, but it's also important from a progressive overload point of view to keep improvement and can keep maintaining exercise participation and keep the prevention of boredom building up in the program and becoming stale from exercise participation. Of course, you've got to be conscious of the specificity principle, but if you're not an athlete and you're not looking for sports performance, you're just looking for health and well-being goals or maybe aesthetic changes to the body, which is a common pursuit from fitness enthusiasts, then you can change the exercise type quite regularly as I mentioned, not only ensure progression and continual working towards goals, but also to prevent boredom, keeping training interesting and exciting. Okay, continuing on, principles of training. Individual differences, maintenance and overtraining. Now the individual differences principle is what you probably expect. We all respond differently to exercise. We all have different bodies and different genetics that make up our bodies. If you had two clients, same sex, same age, same exercise history, same exercise goals, same levels of body fat, same cardiovascular health in terms of blood pressure responses, and you prescribe these two people very similar training loads, what you would find is that no, these two people won't respond the same, because their genetics and the way their body is will affect their response to exercise. And we all know somebody who's quite lean and can eat anything they want without any weight gain. We also know people that who are quite conscious of what they eat, quite conscious of their weight, but seem to be fighting these long-term battles with weight gain. People will respond differently to exercise. Next point is maintenance, the principle of maintenance. What the maintenance principle implies is that if you're happy with your fitness level, if you're happy with your exercise goals, cardiovascular health and well-being, strength levels, body image, all of these things, if you're happy with those, whatever time and effort you invested to get to those goals, you don't have to invest the same amount of time and effort to keep them. Now, for example, if you exercise for a frequency of 3 to 4 times per week to get to your exercise goal, whatever it may be, health and well-being, strength improvements, those types of things, what you'll find is you get to a stage where you're happy, you no longer want to improve, then all you need to do to maintain that level of achievement is to drop back to 1 session per week. Instead of doing 3 to 4, you can maintain a level with only doing 1. You won't improve, you'll stay the same, and you'll prevent reversibility from kicking in. So if I was smart and I used the maintenance principle as a high school teacher, what I should have done is in that 6-week period, that is before the 6-week holidays, where I had to run from one end of the school to the next, up 3 flights of stairs every day, what I should have done to maintain that stair sprinting ability is to come into the school once a week during the holidays and did a couple of stair sprints to maintain my stair sprinting fitness. And that would be the application of the maintenance principle. The last point we're going to talk about on this slide is overtraining. Perhaps the best way to identify overtraining and talk about the principle of overtraining is through a common graph or slide. Okay, let's say this is your exercise goal, your fitness level, your cardiovascular health and well-being, your strength levels, your body image, whatever you want to achieve through exercise, this straight line represents that. What we do is we apply a training load right there to make sure that we improve upon this level. So you're making progress towards your goals. What immediately happens after an exercise session to your health and well-being is that it deteriorates. Your body's in a fatigue state through the exercise stress that you've imposed upon it. But the body is highly adaptive, and what the body will do is supercompensate. It will go above and beyond its previous level, and you'll be making progress towards your exercise goals. At this point, this is ideal to apply the next progressive overload, the next training load I should say, and we get the same effect. Immediately after that, our health and well-being deteriorates as our body is in a stress state, but it will supercompensate and adapt and go above and beyond that previous level. And what we find is through this, our goal, whatever it may be, we actually improves and we make progress towards the achievement of that goal. Now, for a beginner, it's recommended that approximately 48 hours is the time spent between training sessions to ensure this adaptation, to ensure that our body supercompensates, has enough time to recover and look upon the next exercise session with vigour. What happens with overtraining is that we start at the same level, that's our exercise goal, we apply our training load, body fatigues, starts to supercompensate, but we then go and apply another exercise load or an exercise session. Okay, we fatigue again, body tries to supercompensate by going above and beyond its previous level, but we apply another exercise load, exercise session. Fatigue, supercompensate. And what happens in this example is our performance or the progress towards our exercise goals actually deteriorates. And this is when our body is in an overtrained state. Now, some of the signs and symptoms of overtraining include irritability, feeling tired, complaining of heavy legs, increased heart rate in the morning, poor sleep habits, so losing sleep, loss of appetite. If any of your clients present with any of those signs or symptoms, they may be in the early stages of overtraining. And overtraining can occur particularly for a beginner who's not used to regular exercise participation, can occur as much as 12 to 24 hours between exercise sessions, can cause overtraining. As we mentioned before, particularly for a beginner who hasn't had much exercise experience, around about 48 hours between exercise sessions is ideal to ensure that we get the most supercompensation that we can achieve. Now, you've probably heard of the recovery principle or the concept of recovery spoken about before. What recovery implies is that you can do things that actually fast tracks supercompensation. Now, it's important to note that a lot of people consider this to be recovery, allowing enough time for the body to adapt and supercompensate. That is not recovery, that is adaptation. That happens naturally. But recovery implies that we can do some proactive things to fast track this progress. And what I mean by that is recovery implies that we don't fatigue as much and we supercompensate much earlier so we can apply a training load sooner rather than later. Now, principles of recovery are more related to athletes who are looking for elite performance, but some basic principles of recovery can be used by your fitness industry clients, particularly those recovery techniques that don't require a lot of resources or time investment. So we can actually facilitate this adaptation by being proactive in our recovery or what we do between training sessions. Now, what you need to do from a fitness instructor point of view is make a decision on the type of training session that your client has undertaken. Was it a high intense session? Was it a hard training session, or was it a long training session? Was it a volume session? If it was a high intensity session, what you could do as a form of recovery is what's called hydrotherapy or water therapy. Now, the reason I'm suggesting this is because I'm sure all your clients have access to showers, therefore they can do hydrotherapy during their recovery period between training loads. Hydrotherapy for a very hard training session or a high intensity training session is standing under a shower for 3 minutes, which is nice and warm, and then having a 10 to 15 second cold water burst. Now, it's important that you finish on a cold water burst and you do that 3 or 4 times. That stimulates and rejuvenates the nervous system and facilitates recovery from a very hard training session. And again, the reason why I'm suggesting that is because it's minimal time investment and also outlay of resources. Exercise volume session. If it's a long session, one of the best things you can do to facilitate recovery, being proactive between training sessions, is following good nutrition principles. Eating a snack immediately after exercise, within the first 30 minutes after exercise, which is high in carbohydrates and moderate in protein, will ensure that fuel stores get replenished and recovery and adaptation can happen sooner. As well as hydration, ensuring that you're drinking enough fluids to replace not only fluid losses, but also enough fluid to cover exercise or sports performance. So drinking above and beyond what you think your needs will be. And remember that thirst is a poor indicator of hydration, that you already become dehydrated before you come thirsty. So these nutrition and hydrotherapy avenues can be explored for fitness industry clients who want to facilitate adaptation by being proactive and utilising recovery principles. Okay, training methods. We're going to look at the different types of training methods that can be used, particularly for an aerobic session. A lot of your clients, particularly beginner level clients, will spend a lot of time either working on a treadmill, a bike, a rowing machine, a stepper or something like that. Of course, I'll also be engaged in resistance training, but almost exclusively all clients in the fitness industry utilise aerobic means of training for some reason or another. What we're going to look at the different types of training methods that you can utilise as part of a fitness instructor in a gym environment. Let's go back to our initial example of our client who was spending 20 minutes in the gym 3 times per week on a treadmill. How we can make that 20-minute session on the treadmill either continuous, fartlek, interval or circuit based. Okay, number 1 is continuous, which is non-stop. That is, your client is on the treadmill for 20 minutes and they're exercising at the same pace or the same tempo that they can maintain for a 20-minute period without stopping. Next one is fartlek. Which is basically speed variations. Now, example of a fartlek session on a treadmill would be working for 20 minutes. First minute is really high intensity, you run as fast as you can, let's say 12 kilometers per hour. Then for the next 3 minutes, you drop down to something like 6 kilometers an hour, which is only a light jog or a light walk. Then at the end of that 4-minute period, 1 minute high intensity, 3 minute low intensity, you repeat again. You go 1 minute effort, high intensity effort, running at 12 kilometers per hour, and then follow that with 3 minutes of 7 to 8 kilometers per hour or low intensity. So you're still doing continuous work on the treadmill for 20 minutes, but there's speed variations. 1 minute to 4 minutes. 1 minute to 3 minutes, working in 4-minute cycles. Interval. With intervals we use ratios. Well, let's say for this example we use the ratio of 1 to 4. 1 is the exercise effort, 4 is the rest or recovery between the next effort. So for a 20-minute treadmill session, you could get the person to run as hard as they can, as fast as they can for 1 minute. Then they get 4 minutes rest, where they can stop the treadmill, go for a bit of a walk around the gym floor, trying to regain their breath before going back to the treadmill and repeating another 1 minute effort. 1 minute of effort, 4 minutes of recovery equals 5 minutes. Repeat this 4 times and that's a 20-minute session on the treadmill that is interval training based. Now before we continue on, it's important to note that fartlek, which involves speed variations, and interval training, which involves rest and effort, these are high intensity efforts. As you're doing a speed variation or as you're doing your effort on the treadmill, they are high intensity efforts followed by recovery efforts. So the person has to have a bit of a training background before they can do that. It's not really suited for a beginner just yet. With a beginner we want to focus on continuous work to build up their cardiovascular system before we stress it in almost a maximal way. And the last one is circuit. And as the name implies, circuit involves stations. So for a 20-minute session, you could have a treadmill, a rower, a stepper and a bicycle set up, 4 stations. The client spends a minute on each one. They go through all 4 stations, spends 4 minutes, and they go through that 5 times, or they do 5 laps of that circuit, which equals 20 minutes. That's utilising different stations, different exercise experience. It's continuous, you're just going from one to the next in 1 minute blocks over a 20-minute period. Now, as I implied before, circuit and continuous training methods are probably more suited to the beginner as their body adapts and becomes more accustomed to exercise. Interval and fartlek training can be used after, say, 6 to 8 weeks when they're more developed to apply intensity as a form of progressive overload, and to change the exercise so it keeps freshness and avoids training monotony. Thank you for your time and good luck with your study.